But suffice to say, Bitcoin was the original popular innovation from blockchain because it allowed there to be digital money, because it solved this issue of knowing whether money had been copied. It solved it more than any prior technology had that at least attained a certain level of popularity. Now, a lot of interest is shifting to Ethereum, as you mentioned, and to what's called a smart contract. I just want to know briefly one form of smart contract, which is maybe not so smart, a bit of a dumb contract perhaps, is direct debits, automatic direct debits coming out of people's bank accounts. Could you explain how the smart contracts we're talking about, these new smart contracts enabled by blockchain, differ from just old-fashioned automation, such as
Mm.
is done by organizations like banks for direct debits?
Mm. Maybe if we take it just a small step back. So in my book, I go through the three most common metaphors chronologically to understand crypto that people have used as a narrative over time. The first section is crypto as money. So there's like the original idea was around money, and like Bitcoin being this peer-to-peer cash. And so the idea of what they think that they solved is this question of how do we create money on the internet? How do we do it?
Mm.
They solved it through proof of work. They had a consensus mechanism. They were able to define digitally unique things that then, through their conservative libertarian mindsets, by creating a market around it, were thus able to create a kind of free market money. I go into a book in a lot of detail about why it's not money, but that's not a bad thing. But to take it to this question around Ethereum, if Bitcoin solved, like, let's do money on the internet where you can make transactions, Ethereum was more like, all right, if we have money on the internet and we're using computers and computers can program stuff, Turing complete programming languages, then we can also program the automated movement of money in various ways. So we can add if then logic to the movement of money. So if X happens, then do this with my money. And this is the basis of all programming languages, is looking for conditions. And then once those conditions are satisfied, it does a thing. And so smart contracts are essentially little programming languages that are looking for conditions and then doing the thing that they're programmed to do. So you could think as well about, if you take this example that you mentioned of automated debiting for your wage or something, like every month or however long you're getting your monthly wage in the computer system of the bank, it's probably saying something along the lines within the code, like if it has been 30 days, then pay my employees. That would be the most automated kind of way of doing it from the company's bank, like your employer's bank. And then you would receive the money in your bank account. And in order to set up that debit, they had to know your IBAN or your routing number or whatever else to send you that money. So this if then logic is what is automation. That's what like allows automation. It just, you need a system that is looking for conditions, and then it already knows what it needs to do after those conditions are fulfilled. And so this begins to open up some interesting things because of the very fact that cryptocurrency as it exists today is not like money. It doesn't really achieve money, but it does other things that are really, really interesting and really, really cool. When I say that crypto is not money, I piss off a lot of like crypto people,
Mm.
but I'm not saying it as an insult or like downplay what is interesting, that I find interesting from a left-wing perspective about crypto. Earlier when you mentioned how I talked about, it opens up this kind of space for measuring different types of value, right? In the libertarian mindsets, they're thinking very much monoculture, like, very very specific way of thinking about things, about needing to replace the fiat money system with something that's more akin to gold. So Bitcoin always has this digital gold narrative, but the creation, especially smart contracts, although there are ways you can finagle your way with Bitcoin to do similar things, you can create tokens. So in the Ethereum blockchain, you have Ether, which is the native cryptocurrency. So Bitcoin is the native cryptocurrency of the Bitcoin blockchain, Ether of Ethereum, This native cryptocurrency is what incentivizes people to run a node or a server for that blockchain, and they earn that cryptocurrency for doing that. So they earn money in a way. They earn some type of value. Of course, the value of Bitcoin or Ether will fluctuate to some degree, and you may need to do some sort of math to figure out whether it's economically viable for you to do it. But yeah, there is this economic incentive built into the consensus mechanism in all blockchains, basically, all public ones. And so in the Bitcoin one, you're being paid for verifying just Bitcoin transactions. In Ethereum, you're being paid for verifying Ethereum transactions. But Ethereum, the scope of Ethereum transactions, it's much, much, much wider. Like the things that you can do is much wider. And so if we think about capitalism as a governance system, like usually when we think about governance, we may think about voting and things like this, which I think is a part of like it's like in this mind space of governance, especially over digital systems. We can begin to create tokens, which are sort of like empty digital signifiers, like you can think of like points or something like that. And we can use the properties of blockchain being able to create digitally unique things to create if then like bigger systems that use these series of if then statements that basically construct these type of economic systems that we would rather be using or to be experimenting with, that involve maybe an element of capital and maybe an element of voting, because that's like what we're interested in exploring.
Or some other more articulate expression of the person's needs and preferences rather than having them reduced to the quantitative values represented by money. Some more expressive means of communicating or measuring people's preferences via, for instance, these alternative voting mechanisms. So I just want to clarify, I just want to emphasize to people the two things that are really exciting about this. Number one is it increases the ability to scale trust and cooperation in general, which potentially reduces the need for conflict and third-party intermediators of various kinds, which could reduce risks of not just transaction costs and enhancing efficiency, but also reducing risks like corruption and what's the word I'm looking for here? Rentierism. But the second thing that's very exciting about it is specifically, yes, this reduced necessity for trusted third parties to fulfill basic agreements. So it facilitates blockchain technology in general, Ethereum in particular, facilitates greater cooperation by reducing the need for trusted third party human intermediators, like banks, courts, governments, corporations, etc. And it seems likely that machine learning, artificial intelligence will enhance the capability of smart contracts in particular to facilitate more sophisticated forms of agreement between parties, whether they're transactions or otherwise, either without the need for human intermediators or with less need for them. So this is potentially providing access to poorer people to a much wider range of services than was formerly available to them. I'm interested if you've given any thought to the role of AI in particular in making legalese more legible. Think, for instance, every time you have to agree to some terms and service of some app or some website you visit, nobody reads those things. It's a mockery of the principle of the rule of law. I wonder if something like large language models like ChatGPT could be used to provide executive summaries of some of those terms and conditions, which could then be appended to those websites by some regulations like the GDPR, for instance, such that people could have some idea of the basic clauses. I know there's not quite smart contracts, but it is about AI making things more legible. Because of course, when we talk about cooperation, one thing that's needed for genuine cooperation is informed consent, which is something that is which the internet has ridden roughshod over. It's given corporations a massive free hand with people's data and storing things in cookies and all the rest. So I wonder if you've given any thought to that, to how AI can help make legalese and other more difficult terms and conditions, etc., more legible to people, and therefore enhance the informed consent by which people will participate. Because even with a smart contract right now, there can still be a degree of complexity, both technical and legal, involved. But it's interesting to think about how AI might help that situation by, for instance, transforming a paragraph from with a bunch of contracted polysyllabic words into just simpler language which still conveys the fundamental meaning, or extracting a
Mm.
glossary, etc.
Yeah, probably. I feel like anybody could copy and paste it an LLM and just see what it says or get a summary out of it. I mean, I'm no legal expert, I would say, and I would make it clear, like, and what's part of what I write about in the book, like smart contracts is actually a terrible word for this, for what, for actually really understand what's going on, because it implies that there's some sort of legal system in the blockchain that someone is checking, or someone has the potential to sue you or whatever else. Like the smart contracts have nothing to do with the legal system. It is
Well, they may have legal standing in some contexts, or they may not.
well, they may have legal implications for the state of New York Financial Bureau or whatever will be, they'll be on your ass if like you're selling, unregistered securities within New York through tokens on a blockchain. And that's like explicit and that's clear in regulation that they will come after you if you do that. But what I'm trying to say is there is this kind of, the term smart contract is kind of like a pretty libertarian ideological framing of what is going on. Because I mean, really what it is, if you want to break it down to the most true thing, but it also sounds a bit abstract to people, but it's just like continuously running executable scripts, right? Scripts of code that are constantly looking for conditions to be met in order to be run. And nodes are the ones that compute these scripts, and people pay them to do that. So yeah, just to say that whenever you have a smart contract, a smart contract is a computer program. So it looks like if then it has its own variables, it has its own functions that can be really, I mean, someone who has never looked at programming languages before may be just like completely lost trying to read it, because it is, programming languages, it's essentially its own language with a certain logic. It is a language for computers. There is a lot of actually complaints about people in the crypto space about certain smart contracts becoming more and more complicated to the point where it's difficult for people, for any single engineer to really actually understand necessarily what's going on. There's also, of course, put crypto and AI together and venture capital will be knocking on your door, trying to throw money at you very easily. So you have a lot of these startups and projects that want to combine these two things in varying ways of stupidity and interesting. The use of, I mean, there's a bit of use of AI as far as using Copilot in your IDE, your developer environment, to create smart contracts for your specific needs. But there isn't. The thing is, at least with Ethereum, with these major blockchains, at least, there is no AI takes so much computational power. It doesn't make sense to do it on chain. For nodes themselves to be trying to do the computation of AI while also trying to validate transactions is way too much bandwidth for most standard blockchains. Usually the AI part is done off chain in a separate system, and maybe there's communication between them, but there is still not yet a clear way in which those things interact with each other in a native way, if that makes sense.
Well, I know there are hybrid traditional contracts with smart contract components which have caught the attention of regulators and are being discussed. I also know that government by algorithm, algocracy, is being introduced in China under the social credit system, although the vast majority of that is still operated by human individuals. You can see how advances in machine learning make automated governance more feasible. Google and YouTube use automated governance all over the shop. They tried to prevent me buying ads for my video essay because I used the phrase genetic engineering in the video essay, and their bots picked it up as I was advocating genetic engineering, which is apparently banned on YouTube. And I had to get in touch with several different human beings to sort that issue out. So algocracy, government by algorithm, is very much here, quite independent of blockchain or smart contracts. But there is reason to believe, I suspect, which is why it's bizarre to me that Kurzweil doesn't mention this, that AI will enhance the capacity of smart contracts to facilitate more complicated forms of agreement and transaction, including in legal and governance spaces.
I just imagine he probably just doesn't know much about it because it's like a highly selective type of knowledge to know both. I mean, there's like a there is
it's a bit of a tragedy though,
very
because it's
few.
a huge. This will be a huge issue in 5 years. I mean, I
That's
think
kind of what is the issue that I see with a lot of like continuing increase in complexity as far as like computation being able to compute more and more complex things with more and more potential immediate effects. I mean, this is just an extension of the idea by Lawrence Lessig of code is law, which is a very crude, it's very easy to misunderstand that phrase, which is what a lot of crypto people do. They misuse it or misunderstand it as whatever happens on the blockchain is law. Like fuck the government, we're going to do whatever we want. And if you get hacked, that is totally fine because code is law, and therefore whatever was allowed within the smart contract, even if there was a bug, is totally legal in our minds and legitimate. And there, in the book, I go in a lot more detail about this stuff.
So code is law takes us back to in this primitive interpretation, takes us back to the law of the jungle, might is right, etc. What happens happens because it's in cyberspace, but that's not what it was intended to mean.
So like his intention was much more kind of what you're saying with this kind of algocracy, just like platforms using automated systems for governance questions, which don't require AI or crypto at all to do. They're doing it already. This is not something that's coming up all of a sudden because AI is around. This is
they are, however,
long-standing issue.
They are, however, enlisting AI now.
Of course.
I just want to throw that out there. People who may not be familiar.
Yeah. And I'm sure they're doing that to various degrees of successes and failures. So yeah, the blockchains are interesting in the sense that as well, of course, there is a slight truth to it. Like I can understand why people are interested in these legal questions, like, oh, what is the state? And you could hypothetically, with a lot of these things, create systems that are outside of the state, that are fairly autonomous, that use automation and algorithm kind of pseudo algorithms to do governance with each other, that we don't have to rely on like state courts and whatever else to mediate, not necessarily conflict, but just to govern some sort of sense of shared resources,
facilitate
through the use
conflict
of blockchains,
resolution, etc.
Anyway, in both small senses and maybe big senses, like I think there are these projects that are trying to do these, I talk about in the book, like using blockchains for essentially like decentralized court systems. And there is like I don't know, I have a mixed response to a lot of these things, but it's also like one thing to keep in mind, maybe just like interesting historical context, is that court systems outside of the state are not new. It's actually very old. Plenty of either like specific ethnic groups or in certain like tribal societies, they have their own courts and they have their own ways of dealing with conflict and conflict mediation. Like it's also in the cooperative economy, the social economy, a lot of this is like a very old idea for people building this out, is that they needed autonomy outside of the state because they were radical leftists who were like, the state would ruin our solidarity by being involved in like conflicts between us, and that we don't want to allow for and create this space of suing each other for a ton of money through laws that were designed largely by corporates, to be able to sue each other for large amounts of money and for them to protect their IP. A certain amount of autonomy is reached by having these kind of court systems. And there is this promise by libertarians of extremely automated conflict mediation that is, I think, a fallacy. And then this more interesting reality of a mixing of automated and human based systems of governance and conflict mediation combined together 90% of the time. And so it's
which can make the
you know,
systems more democratic rather than less.
it can, or it can make it worse. You know, it's
Mm.
you have to understand it as
And here's the tension between technocracy and democracy posed by automation.
like I just think of it as like this open design space where you can create the most interesting stuff possible and also the most fucked up stuff possible. And it's sort of the much bigger issue is, can you get people that socially agree with whatever system you're creating to take part in it? That is the biggest issue. And so
Scale.
we can create whatever we want. It's not technical scaling though. It's social scaling. Can in a crude way, I don't, this is not the best metaphor, but like, can you sell a product? Can you sell a vision and a dream for people to want to take part in it? Maybe I'm going too much on a soapbox, but like, you know, a lot of people
Oh
are
no, no, I
not
love it. I love it.
feeling, you know, a lot of people are not, they're not loving what they're seeing out in the world right now, you know? Like a lot of people, like, not on the left, like who are would consider themselves apolitical, but they like hate everything, hate the system, are looking for alternatives. They're looking for something different, and the existing political system is not providing that. I mean, that's why we have so many of these reactions, why everyone has turned to Trump. It's why all these other big things. Don't need to go so much into that, but I think we can all agree, like, people are pissed off and annoyed and nihilistic and don't want to engage in the existing political system because it is not answering for like their needs and their desires and wants. They don't feel like they have any power in like influencing any part of society, and therefore the only way that you can feel like you have some type of power is by supporting these strong men who do have this proximity to the levers of power to some degree, and just simply go with them because they will change something, versus milquetoast Democrats not doing a single fucking thing, you know, even if you support them.
Couldn't agree more violently. That is the rise in so-called populism, which to me is an empty, meaningless term, but nonetheless is right-wing authoritarianism, is a vote for some change being better than no change. It's a vote of desperation, the political equivalent the political equivalent to a death of despair, if you like. I find it deeply ironic that if you ask what the main problem with the political right is today, what the main problem with the political left is today, it seems to me that the answer is deeply ironic in both cases. They're failing to fulfill their core duty. That's the core duty of the right. What does it say? The political right says, look, the world's a tough place. There's winners and losers. It's not always going to be fair, but we'll provide you with security. And they're failing with that abysmally, from everything from the climate crisis to regulating AI. And if you just put aside justice, put aside fairness, forget all of that, just think about security, they're failing abysmally in that respect. You have Trump threatening a bloodbath, in his words, if he doesn't win the election, and has yet to concede that he lost the last election in the world, in the greatest economic and military superpower the world has ever seen, the creator and guarantor of the present world order since the Second World War. And the left, I think the left's biggest problem, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, is also deeply ironic. I think it's insufficiently inclusive, which is ironic because the left talks a big game about it inclusive, but in some ways, left-wing organizations can be less inclusive than your average Walmart or McDonald's, which can be rather unfortunate. I don't mean to be too critical, but I bring that up by means of segueing to the question of technology, because I think what you've written about in your excellent book, Blockchain Radicals, which I strongly recommend, and what you do in your podcast, The Blockchain Socialist, yes, lovely black and red there. What you do is, I think, you're a rational, grounded, not idealistic source for hope in the possible use of new and emerging technologies, which is something I think the culture badly needs. Because what we've seen is not just the hopes and the dreams of techno-utopianism fail, but we've seen calamitous social breakdown as a consequence. We have a unprecedented mental health crisis among millennials and Gen Z. Statistically, it goes off in the 2010s, coinciding with the adoption of social media and smartphones, and everything that has to do with that. CEOs in Australia, my country, rate cybersecurity as their top concern, which gives you some idea of how serious that whole threat is. And technology has been at best an ambiguous force in the world. But if you take a look at what Russia is successfully doing with supporting Cambridge Analytica, backing Brexit, backing Trump, backing the rise of the far right in Europe, which has just recently had its best electoral performance in 100 years, with the far right eking to power in France. Big data, technology, social media, these are sources for anxiety and concern amongst a lot of certainly progressive minded people. I found myself rather embarrassed and self conscious listening to Steve Bannon, which I will say I was doing purely for research purposes. If Naomi Klein can do it, then I'm allowed. And I found myself in awkward agreement with him. He was lamenting his fear that the gap between technological progress and social progress has grown so wide now, and he was comparing it to the interwar period. And I think that's a very apt comparison, and I do think that is a big source of our contemporary social crises, is how technology has outpaced regulation in a manner analogous to how it did in the first industrial revolution of the late 19th, early 20th century, with trains and cinema and radio, etc., causing all kinds of exacerbating existing social crises. Of course, the likes of Bannon view this as an opportunity, and they're right to do so. Because people are afraid and seeking security, it's a boon to them. But even Bannon was feeling anxious about this.